You ever found yourself in a situation where your life is so different than what you expected? I'm a prophet of the Lord to the northern kingdom, but I'm on a beach right now covered in fish vomit. I'm not sure what God wants from me. He obviously doesn't want me to go to Tarshish. He was willing to kill a boatload of sailors to get my attention. I'm not quite sure, though, what I'm supposed to do right now. And so I'm going to stay here until he says something. The story of the last 3 days is ridiculous. If I told you it, there's no chance you'd believe it. I think about what happened, and I ask myself, like, why is God so upset with me? Like, he's the one that sent me to Nineveh. Like, I'm not a prophet to Nineveh, I'm a prophet to Israel. And I'm a really good prophet to Israel. Why should I go to Nineveh? These people that hate the Lord, hate my God. Why should I go there and preach mercy? Like, haven't I done enough? Like, I'm really good at what I do. The people love me. The king listens to me. And as part of my leadership, like, the territories that God has promised have grown. Like, if anything, I've brought more worshipers to the Lord because of my ministry. I don't understand why he's so upset. Like, of course, I didn't want to go to Nineveh. It's not like a vacation place. If you wanted more worshipers, I could give him more worshipers. Why go to Nineveh where you're sure to be rejected? Where people are cruel, merciless, bloodthirsty pagans. They don't worship Yahweh, and they'll never worship Yahweh. Like, what's the point? Like, what point is God making here? And honestly, that's kind of my problem with this whole thing. Like, I understand I disobeyed God, like, 100%, like, I don't own that. But, like, why send me to Nineveh? Have y'all seen them? They skin people alive, hang them from the ramparts. Like, that's what they do. I don't care about the Ninevites. It was crazy, though, when they threw me overboard. You know, I knew I was the problem. I knew I was the reason the wind and the waves were there. I had no idea what was going to happen, and so they picked me up and tossed me over. Like, I wasn't sure it was going to work, honestly. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I could not have expected for the wind to stop and the sea to turn to glass and me to sit there in the water and to hear these sailors worshiping Yahweh. Honestly, that was pretty remarkable. Like, they didn't know anything of him. One thing you should know about me is I'm not a great swimmer. I do most of my ministry on land in temples. So swimming's not something I do naturally or well or at all. And so I'm in the water, and I'm wondering what's next for me. And in that moment, you know what I felt? Anger. I'm still mad at God. Like, he put me in this position. I couldn't believe God would call me to Nineveh and then get mad at me for trying to keep his people worshiping him. And so I didn't put up much of a fight. I resigned myself to the depths. He knew I couldn't swim. He knew I was running. It was really God's reason. He's the reason I was there. It's God who put me there. He cast me into the deep. God does what he always does. That is to say, he does what he wants. He does what he pleases. And so I began to sink, and the currents began to toss me back and forth, and I began to wonder what place God had in all of this. Like I said, I didn't fight much of it. I wanted this. He wanted me dead. I deserved it. So okay, fine. There was part of me, if I'm being like completely honest, there's a part of me as I dwindled down to the depths that was fine with this. At least I didn't have to go to Nineveh anymore. At least I didn't have to go preach mercy to people I hate. At least I didn't have to go preach and defile myself in a nation. You know what's funny? When you're close to death, these small moments kind of elongate. And what seems like seconds, or seems like hours, are really just seconds. Began to see my life flash before my eyes. I began to have clarity, and I don't know how long I was thinking, maybe for seconds, maybe for hours, probably seconds. Light began to fade. In my heart, I knew it was possible he might save me. It's possible that the waves that kind of overtook my life, the currents that were pulling me on, it's possible the Lord of the sea could save me. Life had continued to batter me with waves, so what did it matter if it were just new currents, new waves? You see, I know about God. I know about his anger. I know about his wrath. I know about his grace. I know about his mercy. You could give me a test and I'd pass it. Like, I know about God. I know that he is slow to anger. I know he is gracious. I know he is steadfast. My people, Israel, knows this about God. Our whole history is littered with our own rebellion and God's mercy. We're his people. He chose us. He has to give us mercy. And so as I was dwindling and kind of floating to the bottom, there was a part of me that almost understood that God will save me. I am his child. He will give me mercy. He's obligated to by his covenant. There was a part of me that thought, well, either he'll save me or I'll end up dead in his presence and we might have some words for one another. Either way, I'm not sure I thought this was the end. You want to know the truth, though? You want to know the truth of that moment? You think about like being at the bottom and being so close to death. I believed I deserved mercy. It was my birthright. My birthright. I was born into a nation who God chose. I was given a profession that God chose. I'm one of his kids. I'd served. I'd spoke to the people well. I'd guided the king. The territories had expanded. There was a part of me, a big part of me, that as I kind of floated down into oblivion, that believed I deserved mercy. I gave him more worship. What more could this God want? Like, I don't know if you know this. God is a jealous God. He doesn't share well. That's not like something he does with human hearts. I believed I deserved mercy. I believed I deserved mercy. If anyone deserved mercy, it was the prophet of the Lord who had done so much for God. Not the Ninevites. I knew there was only one hope. I only had one hope. At the bottom of that was God's mercy. So the water surrounded me, the weeds wrapped around me. It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever partially drowned, somewhat drowned. I don't know if that's a thing for you all. Like I said, I don't swim. And so at some point I hit the bottom. And I don't know if it was 8 feet, 80 feet, or 800 feet. And I was going to drown in 8 feet. Didn't have to be 800. I hit the bottom. And the weeds began to tangle themselves around my legs and my arms, covered my head. Our people, when someone dies, what they do is they take strips of linen and tightly bind them around the person. It was like that happened to me at the bottom, that the weeds covered my body, covered my head, that there was no possibility of rescue. And so I'm at the bottom, completely wrapped up by weeds. There's no breath. My lungs are burning. I can't move. Surely this is it. Right? Surely this is where my story ends. And, again, these moments are clarifying because all of my hatred for the Ninevites, all of my hatred for God's mercy, all of that went away. You know what I realized in that moment at the bottom? I really don't want to die. And so I began trying to thrash around and kick my arms and my legs, and nothing moved. I got tighter and tighter. The more I thrashed, the tighter it got. And I realized that, like, there's outside of God, there's no hope for me here, that he's going to have to act on his covenant in order to save me. He's going to have to act on his promise. And so, faced with death, all of my courage and rebellion melted away. I just wanted one more breath, one more day, one more life. I began to fade away, began to realize life was leaving me. I could feel my strength fading. It was then that I began to remember the mercy of God, this thing that I told you I know about. Like, I wish I could say I did something noble or not self-serving, but I did, I think, what any of us would do when remembering the mercy of God. I called out to it. There's nothing noble about me almost dying, and all of a sudden, after running from the Lord and being at the bottom and then calling out his mercy, like there was nothing eloquent, and I just realized that there's no hope for me outside of the mercy of God in this moment, that salvation really only belongs to him, and I will only be saved if he acts on his mercy. Like, he was my only hope. My only hope. And so I call out on God. Save me. Salvation belongs to you, God. With whatever I had in my heart, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't speak. It was interesting, too, like, if my story had ended here, it'd be pretty usual drowning, right? Nothing terribly unusual about it. That, here's this guy that ran from the Lord, ran from obedience. And, like, if I'm being honest, I wanted to be the one who determined who should have mercy. I wanted to be the one, I didn't want to be a vessel of mercy. I wanted to be the one who looked at people and judged them and said, you're not worthy of mercy and you're worthy of, like, I wanted to be God is really what it came down to, is I wanted to put myself in a position to judge others deserving or not. And there I was at the bottom of the ocean. Honestly, there's a real sense that I finally got what I wanted. That all of my running, going to Tarshish, running from the presence of the Lord, I got it. At the bottom of the ocean, entangled. And so I cried out to the only thing that would help me was the Lord and his salvation. And so God then intervenes. And again, like, I don't know what I expected. Maybe I expected one of the sailors to jump in. One of these newfound believers in Yahweh to jump in, or a rope to be attached to a weight that I could grab up, or a current to sweep me up. But I can assure you, I did not expect what happened next. Had no framework. Well, it was strange. It was strange. Have you ever been to an open air market? My people have markets that are in blocks, and you walk down the streets and vendors sell cashews or dates or flour or bread, and there's a butcher over there, and the closer you get to water, the more that pungent aroma of rotting fish begins to surround you. And there really is nothing worse than a fish that's just been caught, that has been in the hot sun and begins to rot. Until this experience, I thought that was the most putrid smell you could think. But I can assure you, what's worse than that? Is being inside a fish. Face to face or nose to bladder, whatever. I didn't know for sure what grabbed me, but I'm a smart guy. I'm in the water. I know it wasn't a bear. And so I'm in this fish. I'm thinking about it. Like, I took a breath and I figured this is going to be my last breath. I don't know how much air is in here. With every breath, I figured it was my last one. I couldn't really move, and it wasn't because of the weeds around me. It was just there's no room inside of a fish. I couldn't move my arms up. I could feel the slimy entrails around me, and this is where I was for 3 days. Couldn't see. There's no lighting in there. I didn't really know how long I was in there, because there's no sunset. And so what I did is when I ended up on this beach, I asked the nearest guy who saw me be vomited up, who didn't run, asked him what day it was, and from that, turns out I'd been in this fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I spent a lot of time thinking there, as you can imagine, recounting my steps, like wondering what brought me to the belly of the fish. I'm glad God didn't forget me. I'm glad he didn't leave me there. I'm glad he didn't finish the job. I'm glad he gave me another chance. But I'm here, and I don't know what he wants from me. But I can tell you this, I don't magically love the Ninevites today. They're still who they are, a ruthless, God-hating, pagan culture. It's not like if I just show up there, I am who I am. I'm a prophet of the Lord. I'm a prophet to Israel. I worship the Lord Most High, the God of the sea and the land. They're wicked and cruel and hate God. It's not as if I just show up in Nineveh and start preaching judgment and start preaching mercy, this historically awful culture is going to get into sackcloth and ashes and mourn their wickedness and repent. What's going to happen is they're going to mock me, imprison me, skin me alive, and put my skin on display. That's what's going to happen. So I don't really have a lot of love for the Ninevites. I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad the Lord spared me. So I'm just waiting. I had a lot of time to think. One of the questions I pondered about was, why would God send me to the Ninevites? Why? Is this some sort of weird object lesson? The Ninevites will not repent. That's not going to happen. They're not going to give up their ways. God is going to give his mercy like pearls before swine, and they're going to reject his mercy. And what? So the Israelites can see how great God is and his mercy. We can do that without going to the Ninevites. We don't have to do that. What is the point? Isn't it enough that people worship God here, that we don't need to go to the Ninevites just to be rejected? Why would God send a prophet of the Lord to the Ninevites? And I thought, well, what does this really say about who God is? Okay, we get it. You're merciful. Okay. Do I really have to go to Nineveh for that? We get it. You love everybody, but you love us more. What's the point of this gathering more worshipers? Is it necessary? They're going to reject you. And then I thought, what does it say about God? But what does it say about God's wrath? Can you envision someone more worthy of God's wrath to be swallowed up by God's wrath than a people who worship other gods, than a people who flaunt God's design, a people who mock God's worship, a people who clearly hate his authority and clearly desire to live in a way against, can you imagine someone more deserving? Okay, well, I get it. I ran from the Lord. Okay? I deserved what I got. I deserved to be punished. I ran from the Lord. But that is miles different than how bad the Ninevites are. If there was any group of people worthy of eternal separation, worthy of God's fiery wrath, it's got to be them. I'm one of his chosen people. He's got to save me. He's got to be merciful to me. Then I got to thinking, what about the Messiah? This guy that we're waiting for, the one who's going to be like David and be like Moses, the one who's going to establish Israel and conquer our foes and make us great and make it so we can worship in one nation under Yahweh and do all the, what about him? Aren't I just ushering in him? Aren't I doing what I'm supposed to do to make sure our nation is great? And then I spent some time thinking, what is it about God sending me to the Ninevites that troubles me so much? I realized it was his mercy. Because if you ask me, you understand how I understand mercy. Mercy should be earned. Mercy shouldn't be free like that. It shouldn't just come to anyone. Like, why would God waste his mercy on people who won't choose him? Like, we are Israel, we were chosen, we get his mercy. And so, like the Ninevites who run from the Lord, like, why should they get his mercy? Nothing about this squares with my understanding of God's mercy. And look, I'm a prophet, okay? I know he is gracious and merciful. I know he is good and just. But if that means people like the Ninevites get an opportunity at mercy, I don't understand that. Like, certainly God would say, listen, you can have my mercy when you stop skinning people. That seems reasonable, right? Or certainly you can have my mercy when you've brought down the temples that worship other gods. Certainly you'll do something. God will require the Ninevites to do something in order to earn his mercy. Because if God's mercy is for anyone and everyone, that doesn't square with what I understand God to be. Remember, I know all about God's mercy. I know all about who he is. How is it possible that God would give mercy to people so undeserving? So look, like, I'm just going to sit here on the beach. I'm not going to go anywhere. He wants to send me somewhere, fine. He wants to send me to Nineveh, fine. We can do that. But he's going to have to explain to me why his mercy is for them and what makes them so special.